Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Peterson, host of the podcast WDcast, which is called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, whose tag is Innovation at Scale, which means WD has services that range from strategy, design, digital, and operations to architecture and construction management. So end-to-end services. That's WDpartners.com. Thank you, WD, for hosting this show. We really appreciate it. The mission of this show, WDcast, is to talk to wise people about the burning business platforms of the 21st century. That's our goal. We've always wanted to do it. That's what we like to talk about. And the challenges that are involved with that. So actually, we're not really that concerned about what the business is as long as it's on fire. And there's obviously a lot to talk about. We've got a very special guest with us today. He's an entrepreneur, an architect, a leader of people, which is over 400 people right now, a purveyor of great ideas, and believe it or not, the father of 8 kids on top of all of that. We have with us Chris Doerschlag, and he is the CEO of WD Partners, a global strategy, design, operations, and architecture and engineering firm with offices in the U.S. and India. Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Hello, Lee. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting us do this, actually. I'm going to skip the disclaimer today since we both work for the same company. If Chris says anything, then, anything goes.
Watch out.
So, okay, on your background, yeah. I think, most of us in this room are familiar with your background, but not necessarily so with listeners or even new employers. So a little bit on the background. Tell us how you got here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we could fill a whole show with that. It's interesting in terms of my background. Both my mother and father were immigrants to this country. Mom from Germany, dad from Austria with German heritage. And they kind of, was the stereotypical American dream. They met here in the States, and Dad was, came to this country when he was 14 with $1.25 in his pocket. And I think we've heard that kind of immigrant story from a lot of other folks. But that's kind of the background in terms of how it kind of the whole genesis of it. So he was a first generation immigrant, and for him, living the American dream was an amazing opportunity, and he took full advantage of that. And throughout his career, ended up wanting to be an architect, was the first one of our family to graduate from a U.S.-based college. And when he was, in 1968-ish, plus or minus, is when he started his own architecture firm. And that's why the sign on the door says WD. WD, yeah. Because WD stands for Wolfgang Doerschlag. So I'm very honored and proud to kind of bring forward that legacy of the hard work and effort that my father put into taking the risk to start that company way back when.
So there's also the part about the 8 kids.
There's always the part about the 8 kids.
The part about the 8 kids.
It's kind of hard not to talk about that because that's a story in of itself. But
well, there's also you've got 400 people.
Yeah.
Which is more than a full-time job.
Yeah.
And then 8 kids, as I know from having 4.
Yeah.
It was like kind of a triple overtime job in itself.
It was crazy. That's a crazy story too. I mean, I worked in literally pretty much the only real work I've ever done is in the field. Obviously, I had the opportunity to work with my father when it was a small company, and my dad and I didn't go watch baseball together. We didn't go play golf together. We went into the office and worked together. That's what we did. So I was basically raised on a very Germanic work ethic. It's pretty much as stereotypical as you would like it to be, about being excellent in everything that you do and striving for the best in everything that you do. Kind of, I think that doubled down because of the whole being first generation American, being an immigrant. So it's all that stereotypical stuff. And so when I worked in Columbus for a large architectural engineering firm after I'd worked with my father after I graduated. Actually, during college, I worked for an architectural engineering firm. And then in 1993, no, not 1993, in 89, I kind of looked around and I said, Columbus is the only thing I've ever known. It'd be kind of interesting to go try something else. And I moved to San Francisco because I had a friend out there. And started working out in San Francisco, and that's actually where I met my wife. So worked at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, which is a large, at that time, it was kind of one of those resume building firms, and worked there for a little while, met my wife there. She's an architect as well. And then it's kind of funny story. Our first date was with her mom and dad. There's a lot of information behind that, but we don't have enough time in this show to go over that. But basically what that did is it accelerated the whole dating scene. So within 6 months, I asked her to marry me. Within 6 months, we were married, and we've been married now for, honey, if you're listening to this, don't hold me accountable, but I think it's 26 years, something like that.
Yeah.
And we moved to Columbus in 93. And the company at that time, we had 45 people, a shell of itself in terms of what we are today, which, when Dad looks on that, we still talk a lot about work, even though we don't work together, but he's really proud of that and makes me proud. But yeah, so back to the 8 kids thing, we had, and you know this story because we know each other pretty well, but we had 5 kids under the age of 3.5.
Yeah.
So we had twins, single twins. And the second set of twins was, we finally got the boy, right? So it was 4 girls and 1 boy, 5 kids under the age of 3.5. How upside down can the world get? And oh, by the way, the company went from 40 people to almost 600 people within that period of time.
Right.
So world was pretty stressful. Luckily enough, I was young enough and stupid enough maybe to be able to manage that. But then, I saw that boy come out and I'm like, we've already got 5. He's got to have a brother. It can't just be one boy. We got to try again. So we tried again. It was a girl. And then we were insane enough to try again, and it was a girl. And then 7 years later, we had an oopser, and it was a girl. So
that's funny. That's how we had 3 girls too. As we're thinking, the next one's got to be a boy.
Yeah. So it's been. I mean, there are so many stories. You could go on and on about it, but it's definitely been. It's been humbling in many ways. You get, as my dad used to say, you start out as a lump of coal, and the older you get polished, and finally you turn into that diamond. Then, oh, by the way, it's a little bit too late because you're gone. And it's just interesting to live that much life in a short period of time and have that kind of reflection. It's interesting. It makes for an interesting life.
You've always served as a mentor for me because I have 4 kids.
Yeah.
And there's times when you have 4 kids, you're going into the zone defense. You're trying to figure out where they are, what they're doing.
Oh my gosh.
One of them's bad,
Like, what are the odds, right?
Type of thing. And then I always, like my wife and I would actually say, what are the Doerschlags doing right now?
I appreciate that. It's a lot of work, as we all know. As all of us parents know, it's a lot of work, and it's highly variable.
Yeah.
Highly variable.
Yeah. So is there any correlation between the two?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of correlation. One of the things I think as a leader, regardless of what kind of business you run, you're dealing with people. You know that. It's and every time somebody shows up, every day, it's different. You're talking to a different person. You can't, if you think that you can put together a 3-ring binder, that operational manual, for anything that you do that has to do with managing people, sure, if you're pumping out widgets and you've got a business that's based on, buying a more efficient piece of equipment and hooking up the electrical and turning on the switch, that's one thing. But as we all know, and as many of the listeners know, when you're managing people, it's a completely different game every day in terms of who's showing up, how they're showing up, how to motivate them. And I think that the key is that when you're in the position that I'm in, and when you're kind of running a people-based business, oh my gosh, it's huge. And the challenge is kind of just like running your family. It's variable every time. And I think the additional challenge for our business, as you well know, is that you're smashing together left brain and right brain. You're smashing together art and science. So in terms of, we always used to talk about what's our competitive advantage. We've been at this a long, long time. So there's a lot of lessons learned. There's a lot of understanding about that dynamic and how to manage through that dynamic. That's not typically something that you can just pick off the street. Yeah. You have to have lived that kind of life. And I think it's kind of the same thing. You can transfer that same mentality to your personal life also. You know, and I always talk about this, and you've heard me tell this story, but it's my sleeping on the couch analogy, right? It's the one thing that really drives me, and the one thing that I get really kind of excited about, is understanding human nature and really trying to look at the complexity of a human being and what motivates them, not to take advantage of them, but to give them the opportunity to succeed beyond what they thought they were capable of, right? So to create a path of empowerment. And as a business owner, as a business leader, certainly we have to deliver product for our clients, and we have to do an excellent job, and we want to pursue excellence. But how do we do that? We do that through people, right? And it's not just a soundbite. Culture is not just a soundbite, right? And the additional challenge with that is that you have outside influences. You have clients requesting you do things, and or, surprise, clients behaving badly.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you manage that, right? Yeah. So it's not only do you have the variability of art and science and the variability of who shows up, but the variability of who you work with and how you work with them and how they're showing up. I mean, it's a very, very complex thing. And I think, you know, it's when you're raising a family of 8 or you're dealing with your family, you know, if anybody, I always tell this story too, it's funny. If anybody ever tells you that you have a functional family life, they're lying. There is no such thing as functionality. There are degrees of functionality, right? And if somebody says they've got their act together, BS. Yeah, they true. Don't.
That's really
true. But back to my sleeping on the couch analogy, you know, the real key to, I think one of the real keys to success, or at least it has been for me, and I'm 54 now, so I guess I have permission to say it. I'm not the 32-year-old kid that I used to be.
Yeah.
High degree of self-awareness. You know, how you're showing up, high degree of self-awareness for how you're reacting to somebody else. And this is the soundbite of the century, but communication. You know, what's good communication? It's a high degree of self-awareness. And we were talking about communication. I always tell the story at work. It's like, you know, there have been moments in my 26 years of marriage that I've slept on the couch. You know, when does that usually happen? That usually happens because I've been conflict avoidant, or I haven't been very self-aware of the other individual and how they're taking in my message. And, you know, I plan to be married for the next 25, 30 years. I'll probably be sleeping on the couch again because I'm not perfect. But the reality is that that's the kind of thing that can happen at work. More so than can happen with your spouse.
Oh,
I mean, your spouse
absolutely.
is going to forgive you, right?
Yeah.
Your spouse is going to forgive you, but your coworker is not going to be as forgiving.
Yeah.
And the study that we read, and then is just, you know, that I've read in book, is that if you hurt your trust with somebody, or you break your trust with somebody, it takes 7 I'm sorries to get back the original level of trust. Right?
Yeah.
Your spouse might give you permission for 4 I'm sorries before she or he gets back to that level of love and understanding. A coworker?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Different.
Not so much, right? Yeah. So, and people don't get that. So in terms of your original question, you know, the complexity of my life is kind of matched up with the complexity of the work environment, but that actually drives me. I love that part of it, you know, figuring out people and I mean, you and I are big music aficionados, right? So we've shared that, or just when you see somebody do something excellent,
yeah,
or you see somebody excel to a level that is beyond what you think human capability is, it just, I mean, right now I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about that.
Yeah.
When you see people do that and see people achieve that, it's within their realm to be able to do that, and a lot of people just don't think they can, right? And it's just, if you can make that happen for somebody, that's an awesome feeling.
And one thing I learned a long time ago too was when you see people like that, you know, it's not rare, but it's unusual. First of all, that you are fortunate enough to be working with them. You know, totally. Second of all, you've given them permission to do something, but they're taking it to a different level.
Right.
And I think one of the things I learned over the course of the years was give them more.
That's right. Test them.
What
Push
else
them
you
out.
got? Like,
Right.
how far can you take? Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Take it to kind of like where they're, we always use the term squeaking, where they start to squeak a little bit.
Right.
Then,
Right.
okay, I think I just found it.
And the key is, because we're big, I think we share a lot of these same passions. We talk a lot about, this kind of thing, but empowering somebody not because you want to take advantage of them.
Right.
It's not because you're taking advantage of them to gain yourself. It's a plus. It's that win-win, right? An overused term, but if you can create that kind of energy, and the one thing that's really exciting is if you can do that within a team.
Oh, right.
If you got a team dynamic going on that's like that,
Yeah.
that's like hitting home runs,
Yeah.
right? And we always talk about this. Winners want to work with winners, right? That's a high-performance team. A high-performance team isn't a high-performance team because you're taking advantage of them or you're trying to create a situation to benefit or enrich yourself. It's because you're enriching the whole. And if that is kind of like the best of the best, right?
Yeah, and I think when I was a kid, my second year of Little League, so I was like 10 years old, we won the city championship in Chicago.
How cool is that?
I did not have a lot to do with that because I was 10 years old, so I played sparingly. But I'll never forget that. I think
Totally.
it taught me a lot, and like how much we sort of loved each other, and like how great it was to win.
Yeah.
Winning
feels good.
Yeah, to a degree. But I think like a part of that, and part of what we're talking about too, is making sure that when somebody does win, that you let them know.
Sure.
And a lot of times, like I said in the beginning, part of that winning is say, here's more.
Right.
You won, here's more. Because after a while, if they're just winning, they start to go.
Well, the thing that gets dangerous is ego, right?
Well,
if you win, and that's kind of the, coming back to kind of bringing it back to our industry, the issue that I've always had in our industry is that there's a lot of ego.
Yeah.
A lot of ego. And a lot of, in architecture, you call it the starchitects.
Yeah.
And there's more bad examples than I think actually good examples of that kind of thing. And, in the design industry, you get a lot of rainmakers or a lot of people that, the success is driven by them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as they have a zeitgeist to bring people along with them. But when they start to isolate it and it's because of me and they get that ego, that's such a dangerous pill for culture, for anything.
Well, that's part of the premise of WD Partners too.
Right.
I remember when I first started, which was like 20 centuries ago.
Right.
I mean, one of the first things you told me was just we're going to leave the egos at the door. That used to be like on the wall.
Leave the egos at the door. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the design, in the design industry, I think it's just filled with egos, And I think that, the dangerous thing is when you, in order to build a business, you look at a lot of the creative firms, you look at a lot of the companies, they're successful because of that founder and because they have that DNA, but they never really, very few of them grow to a scale. Very few of them can scale, right? So for me, it's not about my name on the front door. For me, it's about building a culture and building an organization. I've always told you guys, if we can grow this business and it's because I don't show up, but because I have a team that can show up and sell and win, I love that. I'll take that all day long because then we can scale. Then we can be something. But if everything has to point to me and everything's relying on me, you can't scale. But in our business, in the business that we proffer in terms of design, architecture, there's so much of that in the industry. And I think we've given ourselves stereotypically, if you look at the stereotype of an architect or designer, I think we've kind of tainted the well.
Yeah.
In terms of how people view our profession and how people view us, because they stereotype you as that starchitect or as somebody that thinks they know all the answers.
Remember when we had a bunch of people from Phoenix here, and they were walking around, and we were driving them to lunch, and they said to us, "Are you guys really nice? We're starting to figure out that you're actually nice. Like you're not putting us on."
Yeah.
And I think that was a left-handed compliment.
Maybe.
So WD Partners, you've always had a vision. I mean, you've really changed this company from what it was when you grabbed a hold of it. So where do you see this going? this vehicle called WD Partners?
Sure. It's definitely been an interesting journey. And, I also believe that a couple things have to come together in order for success to occur. The opportunity has to be right. You have to be a little bit lucky. And you have to be able to identify and take advantage of the opportunity that you've been given, right? So it's not like not every smart person is going to be successful. Things have to kind of coalesce to happen, right? So when you look at the history and the success of WD Partners, there is definitely an advantage that I was given that there was a seed that was planted by my father, right? So that's something that you want to be careful not to be labeled with nepotism, right? So you had to work your butt off in order to earn the respect initially. And I think within the first 5 years of starting in 1993, I think we had 110% turnover. So I kind of figured that out pretty quick. So we've kind of ridden. If you look at the history of WD, we've actually ridden the history. Locally, you talk about Les Wexner, and Les has been in the news a lot. Lim has been in the news a lot. But if you look about, the timeline, my mom still remembers shopping in his store and seeing him in Kingsdale, putting merchandise on the rack. Yeah. And now look at him, right? So you can kind of parallel that trajectory. So you can say we're smart. You can say that we're hardworking. You can say that we've identified trends, but in large part, a lot of that has just been where the industry has taken us as well. So we were there. We were ready to meet the demand. And I think it's interesting. We had obviously the Great Recession. Everybody's got stories about the Great Recession and kind of how that rejiggered the business. It was interesting in that at that time we had already started the design side of our business. This happens a lot. A lot of the readers will have these kind of same stories. But when you run a business and 90% of your revenue comes from a part of the business that you can see being less critical going forward, you can't change your culture. It's very difficult to change your culture to pay attention to that 10%. And I think a lot of that is happening right now in the industry still, right, in terms of our clients. We talk about that all the time. Yeah. In fact, I think it's beyond the highest level of disruption. I think we're on the tail end. People have kind of identified what they need to do to be successful, and we talk about that a lot. But I think that the problem that's lagging right now is that there are still a lot of embedded cultures in these organizations that are not willing to admit that they need to change, and or there's a legacy issue that's keeping them from changing. And we see that when we work with our clients all the time, right? So I think that it's interesting in that I think that if there's more of an opportunity now to be consultative and to be strategic with the client relationships that we have than there ever has been because of the level of anxiety and the level of change that's going on. But I think we're on the tail. I think we're past the peak point of anxiety in terms of knowing what needs to happen. Now it still needs to change. It needs to evolve, but we're past the peak point.
I was going to ask you about that because I think that's a sort of a driving force just walking in the store every day. Yeah. You're thinking, what can I say or what can I do that's going to help them kind of get over that hump? And I do think that for a lot of retailers in particular, and even restaurateurs now especially, spent the first 20 years of this century thinking like it's not going to happen to me,
right?
Or Amazon's no big deal,
right?
Or that kind of thing. And now we know it all not to be true,
right?
So you're saying you think that we're at a point now where we think like, okay, most everybody who's survived knows what to do.
I think when you look at, honestly, as a consumer, as consumers, we look at the companies that are having trouble, are having problems, and maybe because we're a little closer to it than other people are because it is our business, it's a little bit of a duh. It's a little bit of a duh who's actually, and you can actually almost look at the landscape and you can read the tea leaves in terms of who's going to be having issues going forward and who's not. And I don't think it's really all that surprising when you look at the list of the bankruptcies or the list of the retailers that are having problems. But I think that certainly we're a small company compared to those companies. We service a lot of those big companies. So we have some insights, but put yourself in the shoes of those guys and gals in those leadership. That is an incredibly difficult challenge. It's almost like a poison pill if you have a legacy brand. It's almost like a poison pill. And then you've got the public markets that you have to appease, and the investments that you have to make,
investors,
and the investors and the base that's eroding. I mean, the challenges are tremendous. They're immense. So, but I think, like every challenge, there's an opportunity. And I think you just have to be willing to kind of, sometimes we've been a little too forward thinking. You have to kind of find that sweet spot. And that's sometimes a challenge. Somebody once said, which I think is a great soundbite, it's really easy to predict what the world's going to look like in 5 years. It's really hard to predict what it's going to look like in 6 months, a year and a half. And that's where our world is, right?
It's really hard to get there.
Totally.
As well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, when you look at WD and when you look at our industry in general, there's definitely change that's still happening and still will happen for sure. And I think that we're uniquely positioned because of our portfolio of expertise to help clients succeed in this changing world. But there's definitely volatility out there, no doubt about it. And it's if you can be consultative with your clients and you have the right level of access and permission, you can do some pretty incredible things. So we're pretty excited about that.
I just have to ask, and it goes back to the disclaimer, I guess, and you can choose to answer this or not. We can always edit it. But, but Amazon has, it's just what they've done is just amazing. I just gave a talk at NRF where I mentioned that their annual revenue has increased $265 billion a year within the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, I don't think I've never seen anything like that. Not even Walmart in the beginning.
It's a pretty amazing thing to be able to observe that happen within our lifetime, right? I mean, if you look at within our lifetime in terms of the, and most of the audience that's listening, the transitions that have occurred within our lifetime are amazing.
Yeah, rapidly.
Now you look at the promise of 5G and kind of what that's going to happen, or God help us when. It's not a matter of if, but when the next recession happens and how that shakes up things.
AI as well. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different things going on. But I think that the real I think you really, we've talked about this. I mean, you really have to have a defensible position. And Amazon is almost kind of one of those things. It's almost, how do you defend against that? You think private label brand's going to be it. Well, they're into private label brands too. You think, delivery is going to be that. Well, they're doing delivery too. And the challenge that you have, stating the obvious, is the level of margin and the level of the ability for them to invest is so tremendous and so huge that it's, and there's been a lot of discussion in the marketplace right now about, our laws and our understanding of what a monopoly looks like and how to define a monopoly based on the new reality is somehow out of sync.
You're right.
But when you look at, the monopoly, the definition of monopoly, and Amazon is providing the platform for all these mom and pops to sell.
Yeah.
But in a way, they're really manipulating the definition of what that stands for. So it's how do you compete with that? It's a challenge for anybody. I think it's a challenge for anybody. And if there is ever a reason for you to have a real strong belief and a real strong understanding of what your brand represents and how to represent your brand, today is it, man. If you don't stand for something or you don't have a platform, you don't really have that much.
Yeah, and there's still people doing well, right? I mean,
That's
Walmart's
right,
doing really well. Nike's doing really well. And, they're kind of up against it. Nike said they're not going to sell things on Amazon. They're still doing well. So,
right.
I mean, it's possible, but, to your point, I think it's just a completely different game and how that's attained.
It's easy to sort. It's easier to sort the winners from the losers. But I think the other thing that's kind of interesting, too, is we're in a world, and we talk a lot about this, is we're in a world of third wave, or third wave's a little bit of an outdated term, but the ability, what was that one piece that you sent where, that one piece about it's easy to start a business, but it's difficult to scale a business, which is such a great quote. I think it's such a great quote.
It's a guy from Harry's, and he said there's never been a time easier to start a business or to have a startup, but there's never been a harder time to scale one.
Right, and maybe what we need to do as an industry is we need to redefine what the definition of scale is, right?
Yeah.
Because the definition of scale in the past has been thousands. But I was in a mall the other day, And we have a mall here locally, Easton, but I was in Corte Madera, where I live out in the Bay Area. The place was rocking.
Yeah.
I mean, it was on fire.
Easton is a lot too.
Yeah.
You know?
So, I mean, it's, malls aren't dead. Generically, if you want to look at the whole spectrum of malls, there are a lot of dead ones.
Yeah.
But the ones that were strong have permission to be strong.
Yeah, good
right?
malls are better than ever, and that's kind of the conundrum. Is that a lot of the developers are saying I have like higher foot traffic than ever in these 4 that I own out of 200.
That's right. Yeah, and when you look at ICSC's data, I think it's always been the case that I don't know what it was, 25% of all the malls in the country historically have always driven all the revenue, and the other ones have just been laggards.
Yeah.
So you could have closed them down earlier, and it wouldn't really matter.
Yeah.
So now instead of 1,000 stores, you need 100, and you're done, right? So Tesla or Casper or Bonobos, they put out 100 stores, and then they're done. So what is that? That's the definition of scale in today's market. Scale is not just physical scale. Scale is brand scale, right?
Yeah.
So you have to really, when you talk about scale, you have to really understand kind of what are you defining, right? Scale of a physical footprint? No, it's the scale of your brand or the permission. I don't know. It needs to be reclassified.
Yeah, it's almost like 1,000, small ships and of all different shapes and sizes versus the aircraft carrier
Bingo.
that it used to be.
And that's and we know that to be true. But I think it's the challenges for those legacy brands to morph into that, and or to change that on a platform that's very different looking than that.
In terms of leadership, like, who's your biggest inspiration? Like, who do you look at and go, oh, yeah, that? Or even if it's a company, like, what really inspires you?
I've in my history, I've read probably, I don't know, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I've read hundreds of leadership books. And kind of, what happens if you read 100 of those things, everybody spins off the same basic topics, which is, do the right thing, and it's all the same stuff. There's really just different ways of spinning it. But, when you ask me that question, it varies, over the years, like who's been that mentor, who's created that guiding light. And, I can come up with names that some are not with us anymore, and some are well-known in different academic settings and things like that, and or commercial settings. But I think it's just the one thing that always inspires me. It's not necessarily a person. It's a type of behavior. It's just the visionary, and we always talk about entrepreneurship and things like that, and somebody that's passionate about what they do and they want to follow it through, and they turn it into something, and the ability to inspire people and the ability to lead people and bring people along, again, not for the purpose of manipulation. I think it's a really important thing, right? Because people have done that. People use people and they become successful.
Yeah.
To me, that's never been inspirational by any means. It's the person that changes something, or the person that creates a difference or a change, and it's kind of interesting with, Jeff Bezos. I obviously don't know Jeff personally, but you see kind of the amorphosis of him from being a real human being to being almost a little bit of a demagogue, in terms of the way the media portrays him.
Right.
And
he's at the Academy Awards now and stuff.
Yeah, and he's, all toned up and all that, and he deserves to be that way.
Sure.
And I think there's a little bit of human nature that tugs at us, that kind of drags us up to the other side a little bit, and that's always a challenge. So I think it's interesting when you look at, coming back to that, there's no one person, but I think it's interesting just, again, going back to the study of human nature, what allows us to be successful, and sometimes what can take you off the tracks when you are successful. And there are books about this, but there's a book that talks about, your first ride up the mountain and your success, and then your failure and your second rise, and how that affects you as a person. And, there was a time in my life when everything we did was just on fire, right? And a lot of successes. And then there was a time when the recession happened where you get knocked down. And I think those life lessons kind of, back to the original concept of you start out as a lump of coal and eventually you get ground into a diamond. And then unfortunately, by the time you have all that wisdom and people really listen to you or want to listen to you, you're
back to the coal,
6 feet in the ground, and that's the unfortunate thing about human nature. So there isn't any one person, but it's really just that kind of philosophy of the life's journey and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think a lot of times I get inspiration out of music.
Yeah.
You'll hear a song or something like that, and you think like, how did that happen? How did they think of that?
Oh yeah,
type of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the. I'm a big music junkie as well, and there isn't a lot that I don't like to listen to, but just the story of those bands, and you look back when they were successful and product of the 80s, I guess, and the progressive rock and U2 and Depeche Mode and all those guys. And when you look at the songs that they wrote that are still popular, go back on YouTube and watch them when they perform those songs. Those guys were kids.
Oh, yeah.
15 years old, 16 years old, could barely drive themselves to the gigs, and look at the influence that they had. Yeah. So music is a great it's great for just seeing the rise and fall, and it's just crazy.
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah,
and it never goes away.
No, and it's always changing.
They always change too. They get worse than Jeff Bezos a lot of times.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Like a lot worse.
That's true. That is true.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before I move on to some lightning questions?
No. I think, again, I appreciate getting the opportunity to chat about it. It's always fun. You can always talk about stuff. It's fun to talk about.
Yeah, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks.
Actually. Okay, now I want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you a question. So speaking of music, favorite band?
Oh, God, that's hard when it comes to first because
it's a real hard question for me, too.
It's a generational thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man, I can't. I have been all over the spectrum on that one. It depends on what age. If you say, what age were you when you like that?
Yeah. What was your favorite band when you were 12?
I remember my first experience with the first band that I kind of really got me going was Van Halen. Just the power and the energy and the chords and the enthusiasm and just what an amazing show those guys put on, and the energy and what they did was just. And there's a lot of bands like that. It depends on what church where do you worship, right? I mean that was the first one that I remember listening to and really kind of getting into.
I recently been inspired by some classical stuff. You hear it and you go, oh my God, I've been missing this my whole life.
Yeah. And
all of a sudden you'll hear a song and go, that is beyond good, because it isn't the chorus,
For me, it's I think there are. I can listen to sad music, I can listen to energetic music, I can listen to a lot of different music types, but and classical music as well. But it's for me the music that, and this is just who I am. It's just it's got to have energy. And it's got to really get you going. And I think that's, to me, the most connective thing. But the other thing that's interesting too, and you having girls, it's that whole, when you're working hard and you're in your, early in your days, music is a real big driver for you. And I don't know how it was for you, but then you kind of lose it because you're in the working world and you listen to the radio station on the way home.
That's how I found classical, is on the way home.
Oh, you did? But I think the interesting thing for me, that kind of the reinvention for me musically, was when my daughters brought me their playlist.
Totally.
I mean, I was a product of the super band era, right? Where you heard the big bands, but you didn't hear all the indie bands, and you didn't hear all that music that was available now that's online. And I'm dating myself.
You can find it anywhere.
But when my daughters and my kids bring me the music, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Where'd you get that? That's been a fun kind of thing for me as a dad.
Yeah, I still have friends from long ago that. Now they send me links, check this out on YouTube and stuff like that. And those are inspirational as well. Okay, back to the first thing on your mind, pies.
Any kind of fruit pie.
Sure.
Anything with fruit. I love fruit pies. But I don't know.
Come on, you're like the best pie maker ever.
Well, something that the audience would kind of get a kick out of too, maybe, is that, my wife's kind of a modern day wife. She can cook, but I actually cook. So I make all the meals and cook all the dinners for the kids, and I love to bake. I love being in the kitchen. It's kind of my creative outlet, and I just really enjoy doing that. So every kid has a birthday cake that they ask for and they get. And that question's kind of loaded for me because I love to be creative in the kitchen, and I love that. I actually really enjoy that. That's kind of a hobby for me.
Okay. And a book you're reading, because you read all the time.
The one book that I recently read, and you might be aware of it, but I have a real hard time with titles, but it's Lincoln, and it was the one about the way that he put together his cabinet.
Oh, Doris Day Kearns?
Yeah.
Doris Day, what do I say? Doris Kearns.
And it was just,
I read that.
The thing that's really interesting for me is that when I was in school, I didn't really have any interest in U.S. history because all my history was international. So we were studying U.S. history, and it just never clicked with me. But recently, I've kind of connected with it, and it's just, maybe it's because of what's going on with the election cycle and what's going on with politics in general in this country and the divisiveness of it all. But reading that book was just really, it was interesting and really kind of, connected the dots for me for a lot of different things in terms of why this country is what it is. And I think that's been kind of interesting to read that and reflect on that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned it. We haven't talked about it, but same thing happened to me with history. I read 1776, which might be a good next one for you if you like history at all, because it's an easy read. But, half the time I would have to put the book down and go, it's a miracle we're a country.
That's right.
Read it.
It's pretty amazing.
And then you also get the personal story behind these guys and the doubts that they have, the doubts that you have.
Yeah.
Because a lot of historic figures, all you think about him is like, oh my God, he's a statue.
Right.
He's so great, he's a statue. But really a lot of flaws.
A lot of flaws.
Everybody did.
That's right. Yeah.
Especially Hamilton. Okay, one last one. You're addicted to.
What? That's an interesting question. I actually have a hard time being addicted to anything, honestly. I have a real aversion to routine. And whenever I feel myself kind of getting in a routine, I want to break that. So I kind of think about that as addiction. I'm addicted to wanting to live my best life every day. Maybe that's the way to think about it, right? And trying to figure out what that looks like. And, so that kind of goes against the grain of addiction, because addiction is usually the opposite of that. Yeah,
there's always like rags to riches with that. Rags to riches to rags.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I think one, I guess here's a fun one, and it's a self-acknowledged addiction is perfection. I can't help it, but there's nothing that I can't look at that I can think about how to improve it. It's just the way my head works, and that is dangerous. And but that is definitely something that I'm addicted to is the pursuit of perfection, maybe, because you have to be careful because you can run over people in that pursuit. Yeah. And it can be perceived as wanting to take advantage of somebody or wanting to manipulate somebody. So, and I think maybe that's an older sibling issue, kind of a stereotypical birth order issue, but that pursuit of perfection is really my addiction. That's the first time I've really actually talked that one through, but I could probably commit to that one.
That's a great one, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think the hard part about that is not that I'm your psychoanalyst, right? but the hard part about that is not everybody sees that.
How do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, way back when I used to work for Les Wexner, he was the same way.
Yeah.
And
oh my gosh, yeah.
And but he could see it. He could see how it was perfect.
Right.
And I just couldn't always see it. I was thinking like, that's great. And he's like, no, it's not. And I was like, I thought it was.
What always amazes me is and we're in the, as an architect, you're trained this way, and maybe you're an architect because you're visually oriented. But what always amazes me is when people have absolutely no perception or no understanding of the value of how environment can affect them. And they're completely naive to it. And that always amazes me, you know. And it's
well, you can tell when you go to their house.
Yeah, or you have that, the opposite is true too. Is when you have somebody. Well, the old adage is like when somebody has a ton of money and they have terrible taste.
Right.
Oh my God, that's like a train wreck, right? Yeah. I'll never forget this office building I went into. It was a regional business, and I went into the office building, and it was like a 5-story mid-rise, and I went in there, and the first thing that hits you is wall-to-wall granite, right?
Ooh.
And big pictures of the founders in the elevator lobby, and it's just like, really, guys? Come on, you know. So that's kind of a
marble does that to me.
Yeah.
Like marble?
Yeah.
Like what is this, Rome? Well, we've taken a lot of your time, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. So thank you very much. You've been very gracious, much appreciated, and thanks for making WDcast better. Certainly appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So people, be sure and listen anytime for some more human interaction on hot topics, which, by the way, you're welcome to suggest at WDPartners.com. Also, be sure and subscribe to this podcast. WDcast is at the WDPartners.com website. Go to the menu hamburger in the upper right and hit what we think. And you don't even have to do that, really. You just go to the hamburger. When it opens up, right at the bottom of that hamburger opening, you'll see a little podcast icon. Just hit that, and we've got many great interviews in there already. We have more than 30, I believe, including Google, Lionesque, EY, Donato's, Green Growth Brands, Alexa, Whole Foods, and now the hard-to-corner CEO Chris Doerschlag. Thanks for listening, and remember, as Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So stay frosty out there. Check it out.